Located in Baltimore, Maryland's historic Camden Station, adjacent to the home of Major League Baseball's Baltimore Orioles, is Geppi's Entertainment Museum. This gem of Baltimore is the brainchild of comic book distributor, publisher, and longtime comic fan Stephen A. Geppi. And everything in the museum comes from Mr. Geppi's extensive personal collection of comics and collectible memorabilia. Devon Sanders visited the museum recently to see what the museum has to offer. Let's take a look.
We're standing here in downtown Baltimore at Geppi's Entertainment Museum. We're going to go inside and we're going to see some really awesome things. And now we're inside at the Geppi's Entertainment Museum with Gina Geppi, and you want to take a tour?
Yeah, I would love to show you around.
All right.
This is my dad's private collection. As you may or may not know, it's about 30 years of his collecting. So we do have certified tours here at the museum available from our docents and our curator, but the tour that I like to take is a little bit more personal, so I'm looking forward to showing you guys around.
All right, very good.
So the easiest place to start is our Story in 4 Colors room, which the locals kind of just call the comic book room.
Okay.
So that's going to be up here on the left-hand side.
All right.
And if you're a comic fan at all, this is probably going to be your favorite spot in the museum.
Most definitely. Yeah. All right, so what have we got here?
In here we have our prestige case. This is the comic book room. Starting first at our prestige case, which is where we house the Action Comics #1, which was the first appearance of Superman, and Detective Comics 27, which was the first appearance of Batman. A little interesting fact about Superman actually is that he did not fly when originally introduced, like everyone knows him to now. He leapt very far, so if you remember the expression, leap tall buildings in a single bound,
right.
That's where that came from. Later, when he moved into the radio show, is when things like that and the kryptonite came into life. But those are all things you learn as you come here on a visit. We also have in here everything from the start of comics, which was like the 1500s, into the pulp comics, which were actually a cover for people who were trying to sell liquor back when it was illegal. They used the pulp comic deliveries as a way to cover that up. So it's kind of a little interesting story. Over here we have our collection of Big Little books. These were huge in the 30s. They were 10 cents a piece, and what's really unique about these Big Little books is this collection right here was actually purchased from Whitman Publishing as all their file copies, which means that these books have not only never been sold, they've never been read. The bindings haven't even been broken. So these were, as I said, very popular. They were the largest 10-cent sellers until about 1938, when a character was introduced via comic books, which you may know, named Superman. So right. Superman kind of pushed the little big books out of their popular spot for a while. But now we even have some of these that we sell in our gift shop as like little collector versions of it that are originals, and every time somebody comes in the museum, they just immediately recognize these and fall in love with them. So they're a really cool piece to have. Well, what's great about this room is there's really so much to see that you could stay in here for hours alone just seeing what the comic room has to offer. But over here in this case, you're going to see what some would think is perhaps maybe part of the 20 most boring years in comic history. And the reason they say that is not anything against the characters, because there's characters you'll recognize like Batman and the Hulk. But what it was is when the comics code was there, and that little stamp you see up in the upper corner, the little white stamp, that is when they were basically regulating comics, kind of like an FCC would, telling them what they can and cannot put in comics. And a little interesting fact is that Stan Lee was the creator of Spider-Man, of course, along with many other classic characters, did an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's, our Peter Parker's friend, had taken drugs, and the comics code was completely against the issue. They would not put their authority on it and their approval, and so they published the comic even without it, and it was a huge success, and now it's a very classically known comic. But they kind of realized at the time that we actually don't need to have this approval in order to be able to publish these comics and let them sell well. So the comics code is something that's kind of dissolved along the time, and as you go through the timeline, you'll see most issues don't even have it after certain periods.
I see that you have a lot more than just comics in here. Could you tell us a little bit about this? Yes,
actually, these are some original artwork covers for the comic book price guide, which was created by Bob Overstreet. And actually, any comic collector would know this as, quote unquote, the Bible of the comic industry, which is exactly where you're going to go to look into and see what the value of your comics are. The funny thing about comic value, though, is it's always going to be subjective based on who's trying to buy it, like any other asset or valuable. So if you may have a comic that the comic book price guide may tell you is worth $200, but then you sell it at auction and you get $6,000. You never know, because it's all just based on who wants it. Action Comics, the one that we saw in the beginning, this first appearance of Superman, a really mint condition copy of that could fetch up to $750,000. So it's interesting to take the old books that you have, if you don't know an appraiser, and take something like the comic book price guide and flip through and see exactly what they're worth.
All right, now we're standing in the Revolution Room. Why don't you tell us about some of the things in here?
Well, what I love about this room is, as we've journeyed along the timeline pretty far, like several decades, and you'll see that certain characters that were introduced to you back in the comic book room, the story in 4 colors, are now still completely prevalent at this time in our history. So Batman obviously stands here kind of as like the big patriarch of this generation. Right. But in addition, you'll find where like rock and roll music becomes a huge part of pop culture, everything from the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, and we have lots of pieces of memorabilia from that. But then you also look into the toys that are starting to be made of different products, and we've got the Flintstones, we've got Pez, which a very interesting story about Pez was originally the flavor of Pez was mint, and it came in a Pez dispenser shaped like a cigarette lighter, like a Bic lighter, right. Because that's actually what they were for. They were for smokers, and then they just became adopted as candies after that, and then they took on these great presences and shapes, and everybody knows what a Pez dispenser is. But some really classic toys like the Rock'em Sock'em robots, but you'll see where a lot of these characters, again, that are coming into these toys and these iconic pieces are derived from the comic books, which is awesome because somebody can write a story, a literary piece, and hope that their character is even known, let alone recognized by so many people. And these characters are just lifelong; they live on forever. I mean, even now, Batman has had a resurgence of movies, and so kids that walk in here that may say, "Okay, I wasn't even a thought in my parents' mind when that comic book came out," still know who Batman is because they see it as a movie that's just coming out in the theater. So that's really interesting, and the music plays in here, and it just kind of sets that tone for you about what exactly this generation was.
Right, like I was just like pointing out to you just earlier, we're looking at a Jet magazine that has the Beatles on it. So yeah, there's a little bit of something in here for everyone.
Absolutely. If you walk through here and you don't point at some time and say, "Oh my God, I had that when I was a little kid," I'd be amazed, because even myself, and again, this being my dad's private collection, I've walked through here and told stories about toys that I had when I was little, and then found them in a case 5 minutes later and been like, "That's the one. That's exactly what I had." Right. So it's a really cool, like, nostalgic walk back, not just through history as you would in a standard museum, but you're actually walking through your own personal history because it ties so well to your childhood.
So when your father was putting together this collection, there really wasn't a lot of like eBay back in the day. So can you just tell us about like some of this stuff and maybe how he came to get it?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting story because my father's always been a collector. I mean, so much so that many of us would probably refer to him more as a hoarder, but I can't fault him for that considering what he's done with it. But collections are such an interesting thing because it's really like a group of people that have held on to something or they acquired something. A lot of times it was something as simple as an estate of someone passed away and the family goes through the attic and is like, oh, they had all these old comics, or a warehouse that somebody purchases and in the back is all these comics, or businesses that go under and they're selling off their merchandise. Through the years, as eBay developed, definitely my dad became a hunter on there and was seeking out things. Auction houses a lot of the time. In fact, when we were talking about the Big Little Books back in the Story in 4 Colors, I remember the day my dad purchased that collection. I was actually working for him at his office in Timonium at Diamond Comic Distributors at the time, and I remember when that package came in and he was like a kid in a candy store. It was like, oh my gosh, like the idea of like, I don't think anybody else gets what these are worth and how exciting it is to have it. Again, I love this room because thinking back to my childhood, I think of Barbie, of course. Barbie's such an iconic character, and I learned more things about it. Like when she was created, her creator was all about creating these adult fashion dolls for little girls, and she got so much flack because it was, no, little girls only want to play with baby dolls. They only want to play with baby dolls. So she created this fashion doll, named it after her daughter Barbara, and now we know the story that Barbie's a huge success, even again now translating to children these days who know her as if she just came out. And because she was such a success with the little girls, they wanted to get in on the racket for boys, so G.I. Joe was developed, a doll in similar size, and we have him here as well represented, and a way that boys could kind of get in playing with dolls, so to speak, but it wasn't something that seemed girly. And again, another character that's just lived on. One of the great things about this museum, the way it's laid out, is it's definitely a preference of my dad, that he did not want it to be gallery-style imaging down the wall, meaning that everything was at your eye line, all laid up symmetrically. So instead, he wanted it to be where as you walk through, you have to look all over the place to see things, and that's exactly how it is. So as you walk through here, you'll see movie posters, you'll see animation cells, and actually it's funny because right over here, if you come with me, there's a Oswald the Rabbit poster. And the funny little story about Oswald the Rabbit is it was originally supposed to be a big character that would launch Disney. But they had a bad business deal and they lost the rights to Oswald the Rabbit. So that's when they created Mickey Mouse as their second choice, which of course we know worked out very well for them. But not that long ago, they actually got back the rights to Oswald the Rabbit in a deal with Disney, who owns ABC, releasing sportscaster Al Michaels to NBC. So it was kind of funny to think that Al Michaels was traded for Oswald the Rabbit, to kind of put it, you know, in loose terms. So it's a fun little character to tell that story about, and that people usually recognize but don't know the history behind. So.
Right. And personally, I think that Disney, they won out. Yeah.
We're in our Expanding Universe gallery right now, and Star Wars is, to me, what's unique about it is it's not just a fan base, it's a culture. People who love Star Wars have loved it even if they weren't born when the first movie came out, but just big lovers of it. So this is definitely a popular room in the museum, and one of my favorite pieces in here is the Revenge of the Jedi poster, which is the original poster from the movie before the title was changed to Return of the Jedi, and the idea was that revenge was an emotion unbefitting a Jedi, so they changed it, but it's cool to see the piece. So it was a really cool piece to have in here because people see it and they're like, I don't remember a movie called Revenge of the Jedi, because it didn't exist. It changed titles but before anybody even realized it. But some very cool pieces of movie memorabilia in here, toys again that you'll recognize, and then even as toys progressed into things such as Happy Meal toys and iconic characters from, like, you know, fast food restaurants. Like, everybody was really getting in on the game that they wanted to create a character that would live on, and they have. From Burger King to Ronald McDonald, they're all represented in here as well.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about what you got going on in here?
Well, as you can see, through time, we've said how a lot of things remain the same, like certain characters carried on. If there's something that we can really see where things have changed through time, is video games. We have in here an Atari set, we have some of the handheld video games, and it's funny because being of the generation I'm from, I was born in the 70s, I can remember back as a child having this little bowling game that was like this big, and it was literally like little pins lit up, hit the button, it was like doo, 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 doo. And it was like the most exciting thing in the world to me. And we think about, again, contrasting what's in here now, all these tangible memories that you can hold in your hand versus how everything's gone so digital. And that's the exact reason why I don't feel like the digital age is any threat to comic books, especially because it's not the same memory created. Like, I've played video games in my life, and I can tell you this, I would probably rather go back to playing my little Pac-Man game or my little bowling game just because there's an emotional connection to it. It reminds me of my childhood. Whereas everything else now, I think of my 9-year-old brother, who all of his childhood memories will pretty much be digital. It'll be pictures that are on a disc and, you know, games that you play, and everything is so automatic. But to be able to have those things that you can look back on and be like, oh my gosh, this reminds me of sitting in our basement when I was this age and what have you. So the technology is incredible when you think about any of us who were around when Atari came out and think it was the greatest thing in the world, and like now to look at how, like, there's things that actually have 3D games that you can play. So it definitely shows the difference in generations, I think, between when we were kids and older. But that's what makes it such a great part of the museum, is because that is like essentially an antique. It's, you know, an artifact of our history. So I think it's pretty cool.
It is.
We're in the gallery called America Tunes In, and I have a lot of affection for this room because I'm a big TV lover. I'm quite bordering on addiction to TV. It's my favorite thing. I turn it on as soon as I get home. But again, this is where a lot of our pop culture history came from. The TV sets that we have in here are actual original TV set cases. We've just replaced the screens and the working parts. Okay. We also have a huge collection of TV guide covers. Interestingly enough, the very first TV guide cover, which we have in here, was Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz Jr., or Desi Arnaz's baby, Desi Arnaz Jr., and it was referred to as, you know, Little Ricky on TV, which was actually not played by their original child. It was played by a set of twins, as most are these days. Lucy was the first character ever to appear pregnant on TV, and she was actually pregnant at the time. So little things that it's funny that we look back on now back then, and the idea of they all slept in separate beds, but it was like such a big deal to have somebody appear pregnant on TV, which seems like a pretty natural thing. But again, that's the evolution that we find as we're walking through the museum, and the timeline is just the way things change. As you get into this room, another thing that's interesting is you'll start to see that plastic was invented. So toys are now being made of plastic as opposed to before when they were being made of things like wood or tin. So that's another interesting kind of like little tidbit. We see Walt Disney's return in this room with the Mickey Mouse Club and these shows that people really, from converting from radio time to TV, are now like, wow, these are characters that I don't have to imagine anymore what's going on. I can actually see it live action. And it was, you know, a really exciting time as far as that was concerned. I would say that this room probably draws more of the emotional reactions to people because it was such a turning point in our country's history. So people seeing toys or things that they remember or from their grandparents' day that maybe have passed since, you know, you really do get some really great like emotional connections with the guests that come to Gepppi's Entertainment Museum and the things that we have displayed in the gallery.
All right, so this room has a little bit of something for everyone. Why don't you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, this room that we're in right now is When Heroes Unite, but affectionately we all just kind of refer to it as the Mickey room because there's two tributes specifically in this room, but they're not the only characters represented, and that's Superman and Mickey Mouse. And Mickey Mouse over here, behind us we have the case where Mickey was introduced. We talked about it a little while ago, but Disney with this character that he originally named Mortimer Mouse, and his wife told him that was a stupid name, and so came up with Mickey instead. And so we have all of these little pieces and how far that Disney brand really stretched and continues to today, obviously. So as we walk down here, we can see where, again, imaging was such an important thing, like coming through like these little buttons and text and just the way it translated into advertising for so many different places. The second tribute that we have in here is Superman. Superman, I feel like, is the character you're gonna see almost in every single room in this museum because he is, again, iconic, but is timeless. So we have the big replica of the Daily Planet here and some memorabilia down to even like a belt with Superman logo. And I think this is a shoe brush right here. So you can see it really expanded not just for kids, but for anyone of all ages. Then we come back into what we've seen in other rooms, which is the cowboy face. And how this, again, talking about the very realistic weapons right here, but the Lone Ranger, Gene Autry, you know, you've got these characters that, again, people know who they are today, but this is really when they first came out and were introduced onto the scene. So again, and you even see, we come back to, you know, the brand imaging here with the masks and comic books coming back into the picture. So you'll see those things being represented constantly throughout here. As we're going on, this is again fun where it connects back to me for my dad as being his collection. And my sister actually had told this story and tells it the best, but about how, you know, these are boxes of cookies right here, Popeye cookies. But, you know, cookies that are this old, you can't touch them because they're gonna crumble. But as a collector, you wanna see what you've got. You want it all displayed. So we had these acrylic cut specifically for the cookies. So for any reason my dad wanted to pull these cookies out and touch them and actually, you know, be able to see them in person, they're well protected and time preserved. So as we come through here, of course, Popeye was a huge character. Going through the icons of sports coming in. I mean, we have Sports Legends Museum that's right below us, so it's a great trip to come here and see both in the same day. But with this, we also have to recognize sports as a big part of pop culture, so there's a tribute there. This is one of my favorite things in the museum. In fact, it makes this such a great room for me because I love the old big band times. I love the era of radio as much as I love TV. There's just something so classic about those movies where you're hearing like the radio songs. So this little interactive exhibit right here, you can do everything from speeches, music, TV programs to commercials. So all you do is you just come up and select, and this is the legendary Day of Infamy speech that you had heard that, well, we didn't hear because we weren't around, but December 8th, 1941. So then you can go into the big band music that can play from anything from Glenn Miller to Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington. Programs, we have The Shadow, which was a very popular radio program. We even have The War of the Worlds, which spooked everybody because it was hearing that there was an alien invasion coming and people are hearing it on the radio and they think it's not a TV show, they think it's actual news. So that was a huge moment in the history of our country. And then everything down to little commercials like Ovaltine and Jell-O. Another thing that's interesting is in this case, we have one of the little Orphan Annie decoder rings, which you'll see everybody will remember back from A Christmas Story which of course I thought of when I said Ovaltine, but we even have something like that. So even if you didn't live during this time specifically, you can remember something maybe that you heard mentioned in a movie somewhere, like that represented a previous time. So it's kind of fun to find those little knickknacks and people jump on them.
And now we're in like one of the more unique rooms in the museum. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, we're actually currently standing in our special edition room, which is a very unique room, as you said, for the museum because this houses different exhibits all the time. So currently we're in the midst of the breakdown of our Zombie Nation exhibit by artist Devon Sanders, and that started in October of 2010 and actually had an extension twice because it was such a popular exhibit, and fortunately, because we didn't have our next one coming in yet, we could afford to extend it, but he did zombified pop culture paintings, and it was really, really popular. We even had a huge zombie Silver Surfer. But in here, in the past, we've had everything from a Wizard of Oz tribute, using our MICA students from around the corner to be able to do their take on the Wizard of Oz if they had to draw it. We had a Star Wars anniversary in here. We've had really such unique exhibits that every time you come here, like to see what the special exhibit going on is an exciting thing for our guests. And upcoming next month, I believe it is, that enters which would be May of this year, would be our Japanese tin toy exhibit. So that's going to be really exciting, and that's called Out of This World Toys. So again, when you come, even if you feel like you've seen everything in here or you missed something, come to this special exhibit room because it's a way to really cater to different types of fans that are like really specific, like the zombie crew. Who knew that there were so many fans of zombies, but It was huge and everybody really gravitated towards it. So it'll be exciting to see the fans of the tin toys that come in this time. I'm really excited to show you this actually because this is Gem's newest little jewel. This was formerly just our Pioneer Spirit Room, which actually had a lot of memorabilia from the 1700s. And the reason we opted to change it was while those things were very relevant, and we do have a couple pieces still in there, again, what we take pride in about this museum is that people can stroll through and remember things from their childhood, and you're not going to find a lot of people that would roll into the 1700s room and necessarily remember things from their childhood. So instead, we decided to do something which I'm just such a fan of, and it's our Baltimore Heroes room. What we did is my dad, not just being a lover of comics, but a lover of all things Baltimore, he and my sister decided it would be a great idea to take upon this room and create it into a whole new gallery, which is like the little baby here that we've just started. So it's an evolving exhibit. It's going to constantly be growing with more contributions, but we're celebrating everyone who came from Baltimore and really made something themselves. So I'd love to show you a couple people that we've highlighted just in the beginnings of the exhibit. So
let's go
this way. Funny thing is that people remember a lot of famous people that came out of Baltimore, like maybe John Waters, who we celebrate in here, or the humanitarians like B. Gaddy. But little unknown fact by most people is that Kevin Clash, the creator of Elmo, actually came from Baltimore. So we can kind of almost say that Elmo is a Baltimore hero as well. But Kevin started on a show on WMAR TV called Caboose, and so we have a puppet creation of one of his that he contributed to us. And then as we go through, we tell stories about not just, that's why it's not called Baltimore Celebrities, it's called Baltimore Heroes. And if there's something really unique about people from Baltimore is I think that they really rally around each other and they get excited for other people's accomplishments. It's not a city, it's really more like a town. So within here, we celebrate everyone even down to, over here we have Ernie Tyler, who was the umpire attendant for the Orioles and smashed basically Cal Ripken's record for consecutive games. Ernie actually did 3,769 consecutive games as an umpire attendant for the Orioles, and he just passed recently, but this was a great tribute to him because he's a big part of Baltimore. People who knew the Orioles knew who he was. And the reason, little known fact, that he missed his first game was because he actually went to Cooperstown to see Cal get inducted into the Hall of Fame. So he's willing to relinquish the record to be there to support Cal. But again, through humanitarians, through Dr. Ben Carson, to Tony DeSales, who we actually highlight his work in here, and he was a Baltimore man that would stand out on the street corner and just do beautiful landscape portraits of the city's architecture and just images he saw as he was standing out there. So we've done a couple blow-ups of his images, but also framed some within there. And it was really great putting this room together because there were so many people that wanted to contribute. Even my own uncle, my father's brother, who had passed away, had a little print shop in Little Italy on South High Street. So we actually even have the original window from Geppis Press. So it's also a nice little tribute for us to my family's heritage and what they did when they came out of Baltimore. But some other people like Frank Zappa, Cab Calloway, Billie Holiday, most Baltimoreans probably don't even remember came out of this city. Yeah, so it's exciting, and we just hope to keep growing the exhibit and seeing exactly where we can go from here. And we've already gotten some great response of people being like, hey, I'll donate something to you, I want to see it celebrated. So that's what I love about it. I think it's just a really unique room to see what's come out of this city that's so great. Actually, it connects right to our extra room though.
Okay.
And this is a really unique room because over here, actually if we turn this way, we have some really classic characters, like the Yellow Kid. Yellow Kid, a lot of people think was an Asian stereotype, but he was actually a little Irish kid supposed to be represented, but completely the opposite of normally the cartoons that you would want to see your kids watching, because this is where they believe the term yellow journalism came from. But they would draw a Yellow Kid and they would put in terrible broken down English on his shirt relevant news stories or slogans or something like that, and he kind of just became a little advertising guru, so to speak. But there was everything from kids products that came out of Yellow Kid to adults things like cigarettes. So it was really wild, and he was not what we would consider today to be a great role model for kids, but especially because of the broken English and the kind of like crazy behavior. But honestly, he's a huge character in pop culture history. So, but we go through also to everything from the teddy bear to Charles Lindbergh and politics coming into pop culture. So it's a really nice like time walk through things that maybe you've heard about but didn't really know so much about. What I love about pop culture collecting is it is such a huge part of our country's history to look at things and be like, yes, this related to this time, or I remember when this was going on in the world and I had this particular item. But I think it really, if anything, emphasizes that the more creative you are, the more successful you can be, because all of these things were creation of somebody's imagination, and so many of them have lived on like eternally after that. So, and it's just always fun to look at. I mean, I'm an art lover, same way, but it's never the same as me to walk through an art gallery as to walk through here and be able to talk to everybody and see the things that they remember from childhood.
Okay, well, it looks like we're done. Thanks for like having us.
Absolutely.
And it looks like we've seen everything except for the gift shop.
Yeah.
So I guess that means that we have to come back then.
Of course, Fantastic Forum is always welcome here at Geppi's Entertainment Museum. Remember, a great thing about a gift shop is that's where you start your collection today. So.
Okay. And could you tell us where you're located again?
Absolutely. We're so convenient and so easy to find because we're right next to Camden Yards, literally. So we're on Camden Street, 301 West Camden Street in Baltimore, Maryland, and we're on the second floor of Camden Station. So literally, if you run the length of the warehouse, you see a brick building at the end, that's us. So we're right on the second floor. Our website is www.geppismuseum.com. And of course, you know, we have a Facebook page and we invite everybody to follow us because we're always doing all kinds of fun events here. Like we throw a tea party for kids in the spring. We're doing a murder mystery dinner in the fall. We have our zombie gras event around Mardi Gras time. So there's always something fun going on, and you know, we just really invite everybody. It's for any ages to come down and enjoy, and we just love everybody to get a chance to see it. So.
All right. Well, thanks, Gina. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for being here.